All right. All right. So say for my morph animation, I wanted to change from a goofy little turtle into a bear. So this would have been my first two drawings that I made in Illustrator. So I made a little turtle guy and made a little bear. And how you create these things, I'll probably go over some, I guess, just methods that I'll use to create things in Illustrator next class. But this class, we'll just assume that I've already done all the thinking and this is what I've landed on. So in order to transition between one thing to another in After Effects, a good way to think about it is creating some kind of middle point. So it would be kind of hard, or it's a little trickier to think about taking this shape and turning it into this shape all in one go. So a good way of laying it out is creating some kind of in between. So here is the illustration that I would say is kind of a halfway point between these two characters. Like they both have a head, they both have this kind of main body area, and the turtle only has 2 limbs and the bear ends up having 4 limbs. So some kind of halfway point between those two things. Additional things that are different between the two would be this character has 2 eyes, this character only has 1 eye, this character has ears, this one doesn't have ears. So we'll tackle all that once we get into After Effects. But really, what you're doing is trying to come up with the transition phases to get you to your morph targets. And if it turns out that, in fact, you're like, I don't think this is enough of a smooth transition between these two, you may end up making 2 morph targets where maybe this one would have some little bit of ears added or arms or something like that. It really just depends on how complex your character is and how smooth you want the morph to be. But for this one, I'm going to go ahead and call it okay with just a single kind of in-between phase to get back and forth. The way that I've found is pretty easy for separating out objects to different layers. So say you had been just working away in Illustrator, not necessarily worried about doing all the technical parts yet. So you've just made your illustrations and you have these 3 separate objects. An easy way to quickly distribute stuff to layers is important because in After Effects, that's basically the separator that After Effects uses. So if something is on a separate layer, you would be able to kind of make it its own kind of morphing shape layer. Right now, if I were to right click on this layer, nothing happens because it's kind of in its default state. So Illustrator kind of hides being able to separate things out into layers under this little hamburger button. So if you click that and you say release to layers, then it actually shows when you click down that each of these things are kind of on its own layer. So that's on its own layer. It looks like the turtle is on its own layer down here. Looks like this layer also contains this guy. So you can just delete that. And this one contains a turtle too. So you can just delete that. So now that they're all on their own little separate layers, you can just click and drag it above your layer and it pulls everything out. And then you can delete the empty layers. So now you actually have your objects separated out on their own layers. Oh, it looks like this one still has a turtle. So now they're all separated. So once again, that trick is basically right click and then say release to layers, and you'll get it separated onto multiple layers. So then before I save it, I like to name things so it's easy to know what it is. So I'd call it like bear, something like morph, and then turtle. So I've got my 3 layers. And if I save this, so it's called morph source, this would be the file that I would import into After Effects. So hopping over to that, if this were a empty project, what I would want to do is say right click and then, or you can just go file, import. You don't have to do the right click trick. Say import file, and then find your Illustrator file that you want to bring in. Say import, and the options that you want to use are composition and layer size. If you do that, it'll bring it in as its own composition here called morph source. I'll close both of these so that we would be, oops. Okay. So if you double click morph source, it would open up your composition. And by default, it's actually going to probably look like this. So this is a question that I think Vanessa had, which was like, why is the compositions, like sometimes it looks dark, sometimes it doesn't. So each composition, you can give its own background color. And so I'll often change in the composition settings, which you get to by either right clicking on the composition and going to composition settings, or you can come up here to composition and say composition settings, and it will bring up the several options for your composition. And you can just switch this to some color that will allow you to see whatever is in your composition. So because all of my fill color is black, I'm just changing it to white so that I can see my 2 little characters. Cool. So if I were to let's see, actually I might need to start from scratch so that you guys can see. So let's say that I've got nothing on my stage. These are my 3 Illustrator layers. They would come in as they were laid out in Illustrator, which is all side by side. It's kind of hard to get a turtle. There we go. So it would look more like this when it got brought in originally. And so here's the secret sauce for doing animation on curves that you bring in. So each of these layers kind of has this little Illustrator icon next to it. And to shift it over into something that's easily animatable in After Effects, simply highlight all the layers that you want to use, right click on it, go to create, and then say shapes from vector layer. And when you do that, you can see that it's made basically copies of those Illustrator files. And if you don't click anything, they'll still be selected, and you can click and kind of drag it up. So they'll all be above your Illustrator layers. Then you can delete that. So the reason that you want these is because now I basically have access to animating all the stuff in each of these characters. So in Illustrator, it's saved all the path drawings and all the path information that each of these characters has. So like you can see here, path 6, that's this thing here. And then path 7 is that ear right there. And it's the same for each of the other characters. So this is the target, and it contains all those curves too. And the turtle also contains curves as well. So this is the jumping off point for when you would start your animation. So I will pause there and ask, are there any steps that are unclear at this point that you want me to cover again before I jump into the next section?
If we make something from a vector program like Adobe Fresco, mm-hmm. and then import it into After Effects, it won't have those paths, correct? It'll just have vector lines.
I haven't done that experiment, so I don't know. I've only ever imported in from Illustrator. So if there is a way of, I guess, exporting into Illustrator and opening it up and saving it as an Illustrator file, if it doesn't work out of the program that you mentioned, that might be one way of kind of converting it, but I don't know.
Okay, I'll check it out. I'll let you know.
Cool. All right, sounds like we're good there. Okay, so the next step is basically organizing your characters or whatever element, whether it's kind of landscape elements or a car or a boat, organizing them so that when they morph, it's kind of all lined up so that it'll morph into the right thing. So I would want to put the turtle, maybe line up his little feet so that it kind of lines up with the other feet, and then move the bear into place so that it's kind of over top of the transition one. And so that I know which line is which line, I'll often basically isolate this thing, which is strictly a guide. I'm not going to be doing any animation on this thing. This is my halfway point for both of the other drawings. So I like to separate it by giving it, just some loud color that's easy to see. So I'll go down to my effects, get a fill, drop it on top of it, and red works fine. So now when I'm kind of moving my points around, I know that this red thing is my guide, and that's where I'm trying to move stuff. Also, I will lock the morph, like my guides, so that I don't accidentally select it as I'm doing stuff. Cool. So the next step is the logic behind how you're doing your keyframes so that you morph into one shape and then you morph out of another shape. So you can think of the turtle. I'm basically going to start from the original positions of all these points. So you can select these things individually and move them around, right? So this is the initial position, and where I want to end up is actually with all these points shifted around so that I've kind of created this outline. And then once I've gotten that far, I would crop the turtle layer so that it's no longer visible, because now I'm shifting over to when the bear would be visible. And so with the bear, since this is my final shape, it's kind of the opposite, where you start from the deformed position and you end up at your final position. So that's why the first part of this animation has turtle by itself, and then the second part of this animation has the bear by itself. Cool. Hopefully this will become clear with this step here. So each of these paths have their own stopwatch, and you can highlight all of them. I guess you have to do it individually. It's kind of annoying. There we go. So if you start your watch, or if you start capturing keyframe information and then you move forward in time, any edits you make to the positions of these points will now be saved. So if I come in here using the select tool and I grab one of the points, and I move it, you can see that it added this new keyframe over here. So that point is now animating between those two shapes. And that's basically the long and the short of this process. It's a lot of shifting around these points with this approach. So in the end, what you would end up with is something like this, where at the beginning it starts with a turtle, and then all the points shift around to hit kind of the halfway point, and then it shifts out of that into the bear. So that's kind of the trick with the morph. You're basically hand placing a lot of these things to end up at your final shape. Does that make sense? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, cool. So the idea that I just talked about is basically the way of kind of doing it by hand, and you will for sure end up with kind of the right number of points, and you would be able to kind of edit the controls, shift stuff around, going crazy. A couple, I guess, workflow tips for setting and resetting points would be, so if you've clicked away from your control points, sometimes it can be frustrating to get them to reactivate. The fastest way I found, or the most reliable way I found, is to actively click on one of these path labels, and that will turn on the points again. And then with my select tool on, I'll just grab an individual point. So now that I've done that, I would be able to kind of click around on the individual points. So it's a little bit weird, and sometimes you'll get in a state where you're like, oh, you know, I've clicked my path, I want to move this. Maybe it grabs one, maybe it grabs a bunch of them. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes you'll have to come back over to your layer palette, click on an individual path, highlight a point, and then it goes back into kind of point editing mode. With the select tool, you can do a lot of editing. So you can grab the middle point of your Bezier curve, and you can grab the end point and drag it around, but you don't necessarily have control over both ends if they haven't been separated yet. So if you did want your curve to be able to do something like what's going on here, where it goes in and makes this sharp point, what you would need to use is the pen tool for that point. So if you move the middle part to that point, and then you grab your pen and you hold down the Option key, what that lets you do is grab the handles individually. And that way you can kind of create the correct formation for how your curve needs to go, right? So it goes in, makes that point, comes back out. And the pen tool will behave basically exactly the same as the selection tool. So I usually end up editing mostly using the pen tool, but you can't do a drag select of multiple points with the pen tool. So if you wanted to move both of these at the same time, you would need to switch back to the selection tool. Then you could grab them both at the same time. Now that's like a little bit in the weeds, but when you're moving tons and tons of points around, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit finer control over the individual points. The last tip I'll mention about the pen tool. So see how when I move this middle curve here, it's all kind of janky because the handles are oriented in whatever fashion this is. A quick way of resetting that is actually holding Alt and just clicking on the middle section. And what that will do is it'll switch it back and forth from kind of the default linear back to Bezier. So if you click it, see how it kind of reset the point, and then if you click it one more time, it kind of orients the handles a little bit more in line with what's going on with the other points. So here, this one's kind of janky again, so I'd click it once and then click it again. It's just a little bit faster way than kind of shifting these around by hand all the time. If you want to shift them around by hand all the time, that's fine. It's just a recommendation for getting things going. Cool. So, like I said, the morph target is just a guide. So once you've lined up your drawings, you would turn off your morph outline so that all you're seeing is your drawing changing back and forth. Cool. Pause once again. Any questions on that section?
When you're morphing it, do you have to like do an in between at all, or is it just like you're kind of what you were doing there? You just mash from the turtle to the midpoint, or are you doing like several keyframes in between?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So that was kind of the next part. So you can see here's the turtle, and if I select the layer and then hit U, you can see all the keyframes. And so what I actually started out with was something like this, where this is my initial position and this is my final position. And what I'll often need to do, or what you guys will probably need to do, is see how it's kind of really coming apart at the seams here. So in one of these frames, when you know, your pads are kind of cross intersecting and doing weird stuff, it's good to go ahead and fix some of these so that they're not doing that. So to answer your question, yeah, I'll usually add in a couple of correction frames so that I'm not getting as many instances of stuff just basically crossing out of each container, or this here, you can see like it's kind of out of sorts where the inside of the line shifted to the outside of the line. So if I go back and undo a whole bunch and get my correction frames back, you can see that some of that stuff has been addressed, where I try and keep these things inside of my outline. And I also work on the shape of the head a little bit as it's transitioning so that it doesn't go so crazy. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like just because like the in-betweens and stuff like that, like the line weight changes so much. Like
Mm-hmm.
you find that like adding color, like the example that you had with the Hulk, where the
Mm-hmm.
guy was changing into the Hulk, like how it had like kind of similar colors where it's not as like contrasty, black and white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that like help the transition a little bit? Because I feel like I'm just when I'm looking at this, it's like very obvious, like the line weight changes a lot.
Yeah, no, totally. And so in the next section, or that actually is a good lead into talking about something else. So what I just covered is basically sticking to what you have in Illustrator and pushing all those points around and keeping all the information that you have. So that's fine. And in the end, you can arrive at a kind of a good result. But one thing you could do is really pick and choose exactly what you want from your illustration and use that with an effect on it, like a stroke, so that you could maintain line weight. And here, what I've done is basically I grabbed the outline of the bear. So I'll go ahead and hide this. So back. Okay. So here I have the bear getting into shape. So now it's in final shape. What you can do is you could find if the way you're constructing your illustration, if you have a line that's your like outside line, it's your silhouette line, you could try and find it and copy it basically. So here inside of the contents, I believe it's inside of group 3, try and find the path. So it's path 10 is actually the one that I want. So it's these lines here. And if you have a keyframe for path 10, you can copy it and paste it onto another curve, which is kind of cool. So I guess hold with me just a little bit longer. I know that's not super clear. Basically what I've done is duplicate my bear layer and delete everything that I don't need. So I deleted all the other paths. You can see like it has these groups, the shape, all that stuff. I basically deleted all the contents except for path 10. And then I basically copied the information from the turtle outline and pasted it on the path. So it transitions from the turtle outline into the bear outline. And because I basically have just a stroke running along that, then I'm maintaining my line width. Does that kind of make sense? Or would you like to see it from kind of start to finish?
So you grab the just like the outline layer.
Mm-hmm. So here,
It's like how that's like broken up. It's not stroke. It's when you import it from Illustrator, it's grabbing the inside of the line and the outside of the line. So you're saying you just grab the outside of it? That makes
kind
sense.
of. Yeah, kind of. So here inside, so this is the bear, and you can come in here and basically get rid of all the keys so that I start fresh. So if I had just brought in bear, this is what the bear would be. Nothing's animating, nothing's happening with the bear. So if all I wanted on the bear is this outside line, what I would want to do is find whatever path that is. So if I, there we go. So if I open up my bear layer, you can see that it contains this thing called content. And group 1 is this eyeball, so I don't need it. Group 2 is this eyeball, so I don't need it. And then inside of group 3, I've got all of these individual paths. So I can look at whatever path that is. I don't need that path. That one. You can come in and clear out all the paths that are unnecessary. So then you're left with just this one. And right now, this has a fill effect on it. I don't want it to have a fill. I want it to have a stroke. So what you want to do is go ahead and delete your fill effect. And then here where it says contents, you can click the little add button and say stroke. Then change this to whatever color is wanted. So I'll switch it to black. Dial up the line width, and you can use this now as your outline. So this path, if I were to hit keyframe, what I can do is paste in path information from another one. So if I come over here to my turtle outlines and I find some path that I want. So there's that. So this is the outline path. This is path 9. You can actually turn that off real quick, turn it on. Highlight the keyframe, hit Control C to copy. Come up here to this path, paste, and it puts that keyframe there. So now it's actually transitioning back and forth between those two things. So what you would want to do is probably adjust the position of the final, all of them, so that it's a little bit better. It sticks on the ground. So you can morph between paths that way too, where you're just copying and pasting keyframes. So I guess this trick is a little bit, I think this one is a little bit harder to plan for, because you're basically like, I don't know, you're picking and choosing particular elements of your illustration to use or keep or whatever. If you have a very clear understanding of what you want and what you don't want, then possibly that could help. But it might be more straightforward to stick with an approach where you have your first illustration and you basically use your in-between target, try and hit your target by just pushing and pulling the points around, and then you end up at your bear in the end, or whatever it is at the end. Cool. So, know that's like kind of a rapid fire demo, but what hopefully everybody will be able to work on is getting a more interesting character than this bear going, and break it up into pieces. So here is a head that I made. Actually, I'll just go ahead and insert a head. Okay. So if I were transitioning this guy back and forth from different people, having a fair number of objects that you have good control over is going to make like the possibilities for the blends a lot better. So separating all your elements onto their own layers, you can see I didn't go through and name things. That's going to make it harder to keep track of. So definitely name everything so you know what is connected to what. And then with that, once again, all you would do is select all your layers, right click, create shapes from vector layer, move them up above, and then just delete those. So now these shape layers are the things that you would be animating. Cool. So I know that's kind of short and sweet, but I was hoping that after the text animation, the kinetic topography, and turning everything in, that people would, I guess, be able to react to and have some questions about what they saw or what they would like to be able to do in After Effects, and using the next little bit to answer any questions about how somebody might have achieved an effect, or if I might be able to demo something that they found to be repetitive or not easy to do. So because dead air is always a killer, I'm going to call on people individually. Mitchell, you're first up. Do you have questions about either kinetic topography or what we covered today and would like a little more clarification?
Off the top of my head, no, but I'm sure I can think of something.
Okay.
I wasn't ready for the spot.
No, that's cool.
Just in terms of like today, what we learned, I would benefit a lot from like a small Illustrator run through.
Okay.
Just because I've never used it, and Yeah, I
Oh,
know you
okay.
need to have like vector images, but I don't know.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And in that case, go ahead and pop that open. So you've used Photoshop, obviously, yes? Okay, so the big difference between Photoshop and Illustrator is that Photoshop is a bitmap-based program, so it uses individual pixels. Illustrator is a vector-based program, so everything is based on these paths. So all the stuff I was working with today, that's basically how Illustrator makes everything. It has points, and the points are connected, and you can do like a stroke along the path, or you can fill in the container of the path. And that's how you create all your images in Illustrator. Why that's really cool is it's actually a much more efficient memory-wise of creating really sharp graphics. So for like web and very digital things, it's really nice. So with that being said, let's get going on some of the tools here in Illustrator. So this would be, if you opened up Illustrator for the first time, it'd be something like this. And over here, just like in Photoshop, you have kind of your basic tools. And then over here are a couple options. I believe by default, layers are visible. If layers aren't visible, you would just need to go up to Window and make sure that layers are turned on. And it's not that there aren't layers, it's just that you can't see them at that point. And it's really nice to be able to have them so that you can add a new layer and put objects into those layers so that you can lock them or separate them for importing into After Effects. So the top tool is the Move tool, but it's kind of hard to talk about each of the tools until you have something on the stage. So we'll actually jump down here. This one is by default set to the rectangle. And the rectangle tool is just what it sounds like. It turns your cursor into crosshairs, you drag it out, and you'll make a box. So now all the other tools can kind of be used because there's something on the stage. So the top thing is the selection tool, which can also move things around. If you have multiple objects, you can select between them. You can also drag select to grab multiple objects at the same time. How I did the trick of duplicating right there is I basically held down Alt and see how my cursor changes to the two arrows. Now when you click and drag, it'll drag out a copy. Yeah, I believe that's a good starting point for the Move tool. All right, the one right below it is similar, but it's called the Direct Select tool. So you could accomplish a similar moving around of stuff. Like if I click on this thing, it looks like it's behaving the same, but what you can actually do with this is grab individual points. So if I wanted to change the shape of this box, I could actually grab just that point and move it, or just that point and move it, right? And the other nice part is, say you did have some weird shape going on, you can actually use the align tools in conjunction with this to fix stuff. So if you wanted your points to be nice and straight, you could do a drag select over both of them and then use your little alignment things to be like, all right, make them both on the right, and then grab both your top points and then align it to the top. So you can really get things nice and straight and lined up by combining your direct select with individual points, which is cool. And that works between objects as well. So if I had selected both of those points, I could align them center and align them like that as a way of kind of connecting stuff if you wanted. Cool. Actually never used this tool, Magic Wand. I assume it works similarly to Photoshop. If somebody else is familiar with Magic Wand, please feel free to add here. Going once, going twice. Okay. The lasso select is an easier way of maybe grabbing points that are hard to separate, because with the direct select, you can only do a box. With this one, you can actually like do a curved selection. That's nice. The pen tool is just like in After Effects, where you could move individual points. But in Illustrator, this is how you would add additional control points to a shape. So right now there's only 4. If I wanted to change this to be a hexagon, I could hover over the middle part, like the connector between the 2 points, and see how my cursor changes to a plus sign. So now if I click, then it adds a control point there. And then holding Control, you can move that point, or if you hold Alt, then that would be when you start to do the Bezier curve stuff. And once you let it go, you can grab just one side and start to do very fancy things. So this is, if you wanted to hand draw specific things, the pen tool is definitely going to be where you spend most of your time. I've seen some people try and draw with the brush, like in Photoshop. I guess you can have some good success, but I feel like vector drawings are nice and sharp and contained, so I feel like the pen tool tends to end up with a better result. Cool. So you got your text tool, just like Photoshop. The text is going to be really sharp though, because it's a true vector program, unlike Photoshop, which is faking vector. It's still bitmap. Line tool is basically drawing out 2 points. And then once you've drawn them out, you can come over here to your stroke options. So if you open that up, you can add some weight to your line, like that. Oftentimes people use this for fancy things like a dashed line and letting a computer do it instead of drawing out little dashes individually. If you check that box, then you can start to add in different options that will customize the look of your dashed line. So you can see that right now it has a 0.5 gap in the dash, so you can change that to something else and you'll get a different looking line. You can even add in 2 things. So if I did like that, then it's doing 12 points and then a gap and then 12 points of a 4-point gap and then 12 points of a 4-point gap. So you could have control over long dashes that are close together, would be the result of that. The other important options to keep an eye on are the cap type. So here on the ends, if you were to change that to round, you can see that the ends of my dashes are now rounded. You can kind of get this bubbly look to things. Yeah, that's not a lot to say about that. The corner of your line type, you can actually adjust. So here, if I were to add a stroke to the box, like that, dial it up. So now you can see that there's actually a stroke running around the edge of this. If you change your corner type, you can round it out, soften it up a little bit, or miter it, which is kind of cool. And then where the stroke actually appears, right now it's set to be in the middle. So you can move it to the inside of your path, or you could put it to the outside of your path. So that might be necessary for whatever reason. Cool. Let's see. If you have drawn some stuff out with fill, you can come in with your eraser and kind of carve. And then with your selection tool, if you double click, then you can kind of grab individual parts and delete like that. So that's kind of the main. Oh, actually, the other one that I use all the time is the ink dropper. So if I, oops. So say I've got this blue square over here, and this is my awesome blue square, and I've just made a fresh new one. Oops. I've got all these squares and I'm like, oh, I want them all to be blue. You can actually select them all at the same time, pick your eyedropper and then click on whatever you want and it will shift it over. So it's like a quick way of sampling whatever you want. Cool, so those are kind of the basic tools in Illustrator that you could use to kind of get going. The workflow thing that I would highly recommend spending some time with and using for construction. So say you wanted like a crescent shape, you want to make a moon, right? Like that sickle shape. The way that you approach making that thing in Photoshop is probably you would draw your moon shape or something like that, right? So that would either be, you know, using the pen tool and you draw out this thing, and as you're going, you kind of adjust stuff. End up closing it up, which gets, you know, decent results, and some people are better at using the pen than others. I tend to do a lot of cutting and combining using, let's see, where is it? This thing here. So it's called Pathfinder. And what you can do is basically subtract or add different shapes together to get your final thing. So if you wanted to make a crescent, you could start with a circle, duplicate the circle, you select them both, and then you can just cut, and then you're just left with you know, with this little bit here. So that's a lot faster, and it creates these nice clean shapes. So the different options on Pathfinder are, so here's two shapes. You can select them both and combine them. And then you get this nice single shape like that. You could cut, which is the one that I just did here. So whichever one is on top, oh, okay, glad I mentioned this. So whichever one is on top is the one that's going to subtract from the other one. So you can see the order of things, or you can make sure that the order of things are a certain way by right-clicking on an object and saying arrange, bring to front. So once you do that, you can think of that circle's kind of shifted on top. And now with this one selected, you can hold shift, select the other one, click your subtract, and it will cut out of the other one. And then the last option is use the union. So that's kind of cool. If you wanted to make like an eye shape, you could, where they overlap is all that will be left. So if you select them both and go like that, then you're just left with this little shape like that, right? Cool. So in thinking about stuff like this, like how I made this little shape here, was combining a couple of the different options. So I started with a rectangle. These little dots, if you pull them in, it'll actually round the corners. But I wanted the top round things to not, or to be more round than the bottom things. So what I ended up doing was creating this square to basically cut it flat so that it made it nice and short. And then with a copy of it, I made this one less. Did the same thing, sliced it, and put them together. So what you end up with is this and that. So like looking at your shapes and trying to come up with kind of some clever ways of slicing and cutting things could save you a bunch of time versus going in with the pen tool and you know, breaking your neck trying to get the exact shape that you want, which is fine. If you want to do that, it's cool. Cool. Let's see, are there other Illustrator stuff? Yeah, so once you've, to bring it into After Effects for this project is the important thing. So just make sure that you have layers set up where all that's on a specific layer is just one object, right? So when you're making your character or your scene, make sure everything's separated nicely on layers so that it can be brought into After Effects. And
I'd assume that like working in shapes like this is probably like way easier than like doing like a line work drawing, right? Because like you could like totally just like a lot of the shapes, especially if you're not like changing too much in the shape, like you just change colors or disappear over time.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
so this seems like this would be like an easier approach, kind of the way that you have like the pirate laid out compared to the bear and the turtle.
Yes, yeah. And I guess maybe I started with a more complicated example than was necessary. But yeah, I think that in general, that's what you want to try and do is when
Mm-hmm.
you're coming up with your characters, try and find the things that will morph into each other. So if you were, if you had two characters and your second character, instead of having a chin like this, um, maybe it has a wider, yeah, it has like some weird wide chin like that. And then what you could do, sometimes the trick I'll use to make sure that it's mirrored, just slice it right in half, hold Alt to duplicate it, and you right click, and then you can reflect, sorry, right click, transform, reflect, and then you just want to make sure to pick the option that's correct, which is vertical. You click that, shift it back in place, select them both, combine, and you have your nice symmetrical head with a weird chin. So what you would want to do with this guy, it would be probably getting this thing to morph into this thing. And then if you change the shape of the hat, then you would have this thing morph into this thing. Right? So you kind of pick the elements on your different illustrations that can transition into each other.
If you're changing colors like you have with the Hulk and the human
Mm-hmm.
on the example,
Mm-hmm.
is that something that you manually have to kind of go in and do? Like
A
make
little bit, yeah.
between like
It would be contained, so here in the contents, it has a fill, and so you can keyframe your fill color. So if it starts um, flesh colored and you want them to be green, so you can keyframe color change.
cool.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That got a big discussion going. Thank you, Mitchell. If you think of other things as we're going, please just either write them in chat or speak up in between stuff. Next up is Zeno. Zeno, do you have any thoughts or queries about what we're covered today or from the text assignment?
Right now, I'm just trying to think of what I actually want to morph one thing into another into, just brainstorming in my head.
Okay.
So, yeah, not really any questions. I think I can make the forms I want in Illustrator pretty well. I just have to fiddle around with, animate, trying to get the morph looking right.
Okay. Cool. In that case, I'll let you think, pontificate. Moving on to Adam is next up in the list. If you have questions at the moment, let me know. If you just wanted to think about it for a second, because you were just asking some questions, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel fairly good about this one. I think it's just a matter of just putting some designs together.
Okay.
Is that kind of what you just want for next class for Thursday?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Like
I guess I can talk about that. So just like with the kinetic topography assignment, we want to kind of break it up into chunks, just like all design work. So right now we're trying to come up with what are our two illustration elements that we want to transition between, and then with each of the illustration elements, try and break them down into these small pieces like hat or beard, or if it's a car, like wheels, windows, door, like those kind of things. So create a list for each element. And it's not a huge problem if one side is more complicated than the other. Like in the example, Hulk is way more kind of fleshed out than that simple kind of vector dude that starts with. So you can always like have more elements bloom on the screen and then go away. But oftentimes I like to try and challenge myself to try and match it so that like, oh, his bow tie turned into a hat, or like, I don't know, something neat. So maybe trying to come up with corollaries between each. So if there are 10 elements on one side, try and think of 10 elements on the other side. But if you can't, that's fine. So it can go away.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Putting you on the spot, Val. You are up next. And maybe I'll do one person ahead just so that everybody's not on the spot. Gil is up next, so start thinking, Gil. But Val, do you have questions about the kind of anything that came up during the kinetic topography? I know that you were, out doing other things that involved taking care of injuries. So did you have any time to, well, I guess nobody's assignments are online. But did you have any questions at the moment?
I guess my only question is like, would be able to morph like a person into like a non-person object, maybe?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. No, God, there was like 80s cartoon where people would turn back and forth into cars. I can't remember what it was called. But it was a terrible show, but it is a good example of morphing because their teeth would like turn into the grill of the car and stuff like that. So by all means, morph whatever into anything.
Okay, yeah, great. That was the only thing I was thinking, because like my first idea was like doing like a woman with long hair into like a flower vase with tall flowers, or
Oh,
something
very
like
cool. Okay.
I
Yeah,
thought
that'd be
that was like my first thought. I don't know if I'll do that, but
cool. Yeah, no, that sounds like it'd be fun.
Yeah. And I'll send you an email later about this whole situation.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next up is Gil, and then after is Courtney. So start thinking, Courtney.
Somebody's been going pretty ham on leaf blower for like the last 4 days, so excuse that if it comes up.
I can't really hear.
He just stopped. So. Well, he just stopped after like hours. Anyways, are we allowed to use any like cheats? Like, so if like I've got a character that like, I guess my first thought was like a Power Ranger. So like they like turn into like, they have like a helmet on, and I use like a little glowing effect to like cheat it into like the next form.
Initial thoughts are no, but
okay.
I mean, I don't want to discourage like creative use of stuff, because there's no right way of doing anything in this stuff. So if it accomplishes a neat look, I don't want to tell you that's bad. But for this assignment, really try and stick to transitioning one element into another.
And you're okay with it not being as extreme as like a bear into a turtle, or a small turtle, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's a human into a human, that's fine. Definitely changing the silhouette reasonable amount, adding and subtracting or having things shift around is good. Color change is really good. And so you'll have 2 weeks to work on it. So if you wanted to think about it in passes, like adding layers of complexity, that could also be a thought process where maybe you start with a simple one, like a frog into a toadstool or something like that. So then you could have something next to it where it's like grass turning into something else. So you could kind of keep building, practicing different different shapes.
Cool, sounds good.
Cool. All right, Courtney is up and Val just went. So Z, you would be after Courtney.
I think my only question was what someone asked earlier about like whether it would be better to do the colors in After Effects or in Illustrator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So besides that, I just need to figure out what I'm going to do.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I guess the way of adding in keyframes to the paths once you run through it. This goes kind of for everybody. I think until you get in there and you convert an Illustrator layer into a shape and you actually dig into the paths and start to put keyframes on it, it's all very well and good in theory. So please refer back to the video, but if it's not working, just let me know. All right, cool. Next up, see, I said Z is next, and then after Z, Jose. So start thinking of questions, Jose. Z, go for it.
I think somebody just like asked the question that I don't want to ask. Like
Okay.
Turn to the person to like a not person.
Okay.
Something like that. So,
Cool. Now it's it. Sounds good. Sounds good. If you think of anything else as we're going, just let me know. All right, Jose, you're up, and after Jose will be Julian. So I'll start thinking Julian.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure what to ask. I'm
Okay.
a little lost right now.
Oh, were you? Did you see the demo? Did you see what was going on?
No, I just got into class. Tom
Oh.
got the better of me today, so
Oh, okay.
I'm just getting in right now. So I'm not entirely sure what's
All right.
going on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can do a quick overview of what we just covered. So we
Okay.
basically dove into the assignment description, which you can find in your Google Drive folder, and which is this
Okay.
one, the morph assignment. So while we're here and you're looking at stuff, make sure to change the due date to October 8th instead of October 5th.
Okay.
So open up your assignment, switch that over just so there's no confusion later.
Okay.
But yeah, basically what we're doing is trying to think of two characters and transitioning in between them. So this example, you can see it's just kind of this little simple vector of Hulk transitioning back and forth from Bruce Banner.
Yeah.
And this is using a combination of Illustrator and After Effects. And the way that we're gonna do this type of morph is by creating our little image in, oops, what's wrong? In Illustrator, which, oh, it looks like I've deleted all my stuff. So don't think I can get it back, so I'll just need to jump in Illustrator. You'll have to trust me. So basically,
Okay.
I made these characters in Illustrator. So this is my starting point. It's a turtle, and
Okay.
my end point was this bear. So I was like, how to get a turtle to blow up into a bear. And the way that you do it is, or one workflow that I recommend is basically you have your bear here. Let me, yeah, I'll go ahead and turn these off for now. So you would have your final thing and you have your initial.
Mm-hmm.
In Illustrator, the three things that I actually made were this bear, this turtle, and then this in-between thing, which is kind of the halfway point. And so what you do is you animate the turtle to kind of morph into this thing, and then
Okay.
you animate this thing to transition from this halfway point into the bear. So you basically, as you're planning out your illustration, you try and identify what would be a good halfway target, and you have your starting point that blends into the halfway, then the halfway into your final. So that's kind of the workflow that you got going on there.
Okay.
The secret sauce for getting things working in After Effects is once you import in your Illustrator file, you're going to get these little Illustrator layers. So to turn the turtle into something that I can animate in After Effects, if you drag it out, it's pretty simple. You just would right click on your Illustrator layer, go to create, and then create shapes from vector layer. And now this is its own thing, and you can delete your Illustrator layer. So now this is your animatable thing in After Effects. So it's kind of creating a copy of it.
Okay.
Once you have that, you have access to all the individual points, like the little control points, and you can put keyframes on those and go back and forth. We've been recording this whole thing, so you should be able to watch like the in-depth, back like
Okay.
little nitty-gritty stuff just in like an hour or so. I'll put it up online. So I
Okay.
won't go into that again, but that's basically the workflow. Is your initial, you start with, an initial point, and you have a final point, and so the hope is that you're able to create this transition between them. Cool.
Okay. Sounds good.
And for going, what I was doing with round robin questions, in addition to kind of this stuff, if you have any questions that relate to the kinetic topography, if there was something that was going on in that that you wanted me to touch on again, I'm happy to do that too. So I can always loop back if you think of something as I'm going through the rest of the students, write down or put it in chat or something, and
Okay.
just alert me and let me know.
Okay. All right. Yeah. If I think of anything, I'll let you know, and if not, I'll email you if I think of anything after class.
Okay, cool. And I'm not sure if you were in class yet, but I was basically saying for Thursday, try and come up with the characters that you want to use, or you don't have to have them finished or illustrated or anything, but like the general idea. Like I think Val was saying she wanted to have like a lady turn into a flower or something like that. It's just having your start point and your end point. And then also, in addition to that, try and identify the elements in your illustration that you could blend between different things. And so what I mean by that is in Illustrator, if you have a character, like for example, if it was this kind of like pirate thing, say this is not a great example, but if I were blending this guy into this guy, you could think of this element, which is separated, would transition into this element, right? So if it were, a lady into a flower, maybe her hair turns into some of the petals and her arms turn into the leaves or something like that. So trying to find corollaries on each of your illustrations that can morph into each other.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
All right.
All right,
I don't know if you said it to Jose, but it's also due on the 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All
All right. Next up was Julian, I believe. And after Julian is Madeline. So start thinking of anything that you want to ask.
I think my only question right now is whether you would recommend using a stroke and a fill in Illustrator, because the pirate example and also the like Hulk example didn't look like they had a stroke. But then the like bear and turtle were only strokes. So
those were fills, actually.
oh, okay. So
yeah,
did you
so that was, what's that?
Did you convert like the lines into the shapes?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it really is. It's like if you're able to come up with an illustration where you're able to treat outlines in a certain way that can blend between different things, that's totally fine. Like you can do that. But basically how I was making the turtles and stuff like that was using a lot of my trick of cutting things out. So like the head of the turtle was actually, it started with a circle and oops, I copied it, shrink it down a little bit, moved it back in place, highlighted both of them, and cut it out. So this is technically still fill. This isn't a stroke. So that was kind of how I did stuff, was kind of subtracting from a big outer thing.
Okay. Because I didn't know if like the layers would work the same with both the fill and a stroke. So
yeah, so you can add either. Like
okay.
it's under the so in After Effects, it's here. So right now all these things are using a fill, but if you wanted to add a stroke, you could just say stroke, and then get to something. So now all of my elements have this red stroke. So you can add either a stroke or a fill to any path.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So Madeline, I believe you were next, and after Madeline is Anisha. So start thinking of a question if you have it.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm having a little bit of the same problem as yesterday where it's cutting out a bit. So you may have already answered this, but you talked about doing like a one shape morphing with like sort of a background. Like I think you used grass and stuff as an example, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
If we're doing something like that, would you recommend having the like background and the shape you're morphing on like different layers from each other?
Mm-hmm.
Or would that make, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So a same layer would make things too complicated.
Yeah, I think that, and this is definitely I would recommend starting with like in your idea, and when you start executing on it, hopefully because it's kind of just this static image that's morphing it back and forth from each other, you can kind of keep increasing the complexity. If you end up like, you know, I'm starting out, I just want to make a mushroom turn into a I don't know, a caterpillar, and then back and forth. So you knock that out of the park real quick. You finish that in like a day. Then you could have the caterpillar going between grass, which is like blending back and forth between stuff, or maybe the mountains are transitioning or whatever. So you can kind of keep adding this weird boomerang effect to all the different elements. So you could keep increasing the complexity of things, but starting out with a very makeable target where you are, you know, I guess figuring out this process to begin with.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I don't really have many other questions since we talked for a while yesterday, so
great.
I'm all set.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, Anisha, you are up, and after you is Vicky. So Vicky, start thinking of anything if you have some questions.
I don't really have any questions. I do have like an idea in mind of what I want to do.
Uh-huh.
So I want to, well, like you were saying with Madeline, I kind of want to start off kind of simple with just changing colors, like have the same kind of like facial structure, but then just changing the colors of the drawing, and then maybe doing like more animated things for the second part. I don't know.
Definitely the silhouette needs to change, or elements need to change somewhat. It doesn't have to be crazy, like it doesn't have to be as extreme as a turtle into a bear, but your initial plan definitely should include some change in just silhouette or something like that. So even if you wanted to keep it at that level, like there's no interior information on your character, it's just a silhouette. You could have one like the silhouette of a you know, a short person that has long arms blends into a tall person with short arms. So having that transition back and forth.
Yeah, see, like I was thinking more of a, like I would do, you know, Medusa, like how she was like human and then turning into like kind of, well, just like the Hulk thing.
Yeah.
But it would just be a change in facial expression rather than like the way that they like look. I get. Besides the color of them.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll be interested to see the kind of, because that's almost basically just like animating a shape, making an, or make a face, making an expression.
Oh yeah.
Which is, that's, and I guess technically that would check all the boxes. So I can't poo-poo that too much, but yeah, keep thinking about it.
Okay.
If that's really what you want to do, then go for it. Otherwise, just kind of keep messing around with different ideas.
Okay.
All right, thanks. So Vicky was up next, and then after Vicky is Vanessa.
For me, I guess the only question I have is like, because like in assignment, you have the person turn into Hulk and then the Hulk turn back into a person.
Mhm.
So for like two subjects, do we turn one to another, and then do we have to like turn it back into the first?
Yeah, so that it is a loop. Yeah.
Okay.
So the hope is that it can be like a little GIF. You could put something there, and it can just play as a permanent animation.
Okay. All right. That's it.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much. So Vanessa, and then Autumn. Start thinking of anything if you have any questions.
So currently I don't really have questions. I mean, there'll probably be some that come up when I'm actually working on it. I guess I maybe have sort of an idea forming of like taking a character and turning it into an object, like taking like a woman and morphing her into waves and then back again.
Oh, cool. Okay. That could be fun.
And
yeah,
that's
so
pretty much it.
Yeah, just start thinking about, I guess, if there are additional ways of making the wave have kind of, I don't know how intricate the woman illustration will be, but if it's, you know, she has a face and a mouth and all that kind of thing, if there are parts of the wave that can blend into those and then back out, just start thinking about that kind of thing. Cool. So Autumn, and then finally Gabrielle. So
Yeah, I don't really have any questions right now. I feel like you were pretty thorough in the answers for everyone else's questions, and that was helpful.
Great. Sounds good. So Gabrielle, do you have anything any queries, quandaries, concerns?
I have I just had a question. I promise you.
Okay.
Okay. Never mind. Never mind. If I remember it, I'll email you about it. But at the moment, I can't remember what it is. But other than the question that I just had, that I can't remember, I don't have any other questions. You did a pretty good job of explaining the project, so I'm pretty good. I do have an idea of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to know like how you think it would be, what would the easiest way of executing it would be. So I was thinking about doing buildings transforming into not a human figure, but transforming into maybe like a face, somebody's face. What would be the best way to go about doing that? Or do you think that would be a good idea at all, considering the time frame that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's neat, where you could kind of have people always use this word, but juxtaposition of hard angles of buildings, or that's kind of linear, soft curves. So it's nice to transition between those two looks. So I think it could be really cool, and like, you know, windows can turn into eyes, different things, ladders can turn into a bow tie, or, you know, whatever. So yeah, I think it'd be a fun exercise. So I'll be interested to see what you have transitioning.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I feel like this is a simple to explain project that takes a while to make, because you know, you got to come up with a fun illustration, and then you got to move around a ton of points, I guess, depending on how complicated it is. Some maybe more points than others, but really time in the chair and time executing on the project is probably going to be the majority of things. Understanding what to do, it sounds like most people have a good idea. So at this point, if using the kind of remaining hour of class just working was my plan, and I'm glad we've gotten there so that you can get some of the work and legwork done for next class so that we can kind of discuss and give feedback to everybody's ideas next class. And I guess I'll try and come up with tips and tricks that can relate specifically to this thing. Yeah, cool. So with that being said, you guys please use the remaining time to keep trucking along. If you have any questions that you think of once I hang up, just shoot me a quick email and I'll answer them as best I can. Cool. Well, thank you very much for questions and all the hard work on the last project. I thought everything is turning out great. I'm really pleased with how everybody's coming along, and it seems like you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. So thank you very much. All right, you guys have a good rest of the day. I'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, Kirby.
No problem.
Actually, do you mind if I just update you real quick?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay, so I do need surgery. It is tomorrow.
Okay.
Exciting. I will be getting 2 screws in my elbow, essentially. What it looks like for recovery, I may not be able to make it to the Thursday class. I will probably watch the recording just because I don't know how loopy I'll be on the pain medications the second day.